Welcome from the week that the back to school sickness hit my house. I was sick a day. My son had to come home from school the next day. Nobody feels great. Thank God for Nicholas Roberts, who does our editing. He's doing more of the editing this week than he usually does. So you might just leave a comment telling him he did a great job, because I'm sure he'll do a great job. This sermon on the shipwreck turned out far more personally difficult than I thought it would be. And I found myself wrestling with it for more days than I usually do with a sermon. It was well received in the sanctuary at in-person worship. I hope that it maybe is helpful to you. It's always a gamble, sort of, to put a sermon out and you wonder, like, why all this extra work? What is going on? Why is this so hard? I had to get myself out of the way. So hopefully I got myself out of the way enough that the word shines through. I hope you have a great week and that this back to school sickness doesn't hit your house. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Straits.
Today's scripture is from Acts chapter 27, verses 27 through 32. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away.
After my dad retired from a career in nuclear power, he built a couple of kayaks in his garage, and then he used one of them in the MR340, which is the world's longest nonstop river race, which goes 340 miles from Kansas City, Missouri to St. Louis, Missouri on the Missouri River in 3.5 days. It's nonstop. They kayak at night, they canoe at night. It's crazy. It's considered an ultra marathon, and my dad finished it twice. The first year he raced, my brother gave him a GPS device, or global positioning system, which is what my brother is an expert in. Rob can make data sing. He's really good at it. So he gave Dad this little handheld device that he could clip on that showed him exactly where the channel of the river ran. Because you think, like, people aren't going to get lost on the river, but if you're going a certain speed and you're trying to maintain it, you need to stay with the current, and the current is really in the channel and not the stuff outside the channel. So the water was high that year, which meant that many things that should have been above water, like the wing dikes made of rock that help control the river's flow and energy, they were sitting under the surface of the water, not far, but dangerously underwater. And many paddlers that year, in the dark or in their exhaustion, they ran their boats aground over the wing dikes and caused damage to their boats, injury to themselves, delay in the race. My dad, though, didn't hit a wing dike because he had the depths with him, basically in the palm of his hand if he put down his paddle, because of the love of my brother, who shared his professional expertise to help Dad in his hobby. We all did. We were Team Dad. Today's scripture story has a depth finder in it, but it's an old-fashioned way of doing it. They didn't have GPS back then. They likely sent out bell-shaped weights from the boat, tied up with rope that had marked lengths with knots, so they could measure when they pulled it in how deep the water was. In general, the bottom will get closer as you get closer to land. So we get the idea from the depths that they called first 20 fathoms and then 15 fathoms that they are getting closer to land very quickly. They're moving from 120 feet in depth to 90 feet in depth. And at 90 feet, they stopped texting the depths altogether, which I thought was a little bit surprising. But then I researched the boat. Now, you and I know that this was no boat, this was a ship, because there were 276 people on board the ship. So I found this book by Robert Cornuke, I think, who researched Paul's shipwreck. He wrote a book called The Lost Shipwreck of Paul. And the book contends that the ship Paul was on was probably an Alexandrian grain freighter. Now, a historian around this time saw one of these ships and wrote a description. It was about 180 feet long, which is a pretty long boat. And then the beam, or the width of it, was 45 feet. It was about a quarter of the length. So it was a wide boat. And then the depth of it was 44 feet from rail to keel. That's a deep boat. This boat was meant for moving a city's year's worth of grain at one time. So at this time in our story, on this giant boat, all the cargo's been thrown overboard. Most of the gear is gone except for the lifeboat and the anchors. But some of the grain, at least, was still in the keel. So it still has its major load in the boat. So if you think about how big and deep that boat is, you can see why they stopped measuring the depth at 90 feet. I mean, that boat was probably sitting pretty low in the water, and a significant part of that 90 feet was being taken up by this heavy boat that's 44 feet from rail to keel. And it's at this point in the story that the sailors, so we have sailors, we have soldiers, we have prisoners, probably other people on the boat. The sailors announce that they're going to take the lifeboat off the boat to go drop the anchors off the bow. They've dropped 4 anchors off the stern, but now they're going to go drop the bow anchors. And all the experienced sailors are basically getting off of the ship and onto the lifeboat when they're close to land. They're not going to come back. That's not the plan. So how then are the people on the boat supposed to make it to land? Because, docking a boat that size is really hard. And they're not docking. They're obviously going to wreck the boat because they have no gear, nothing to tie up to. Like, they're just trying to hit ground somewhere that doesn't sink them all before they can swim. Getting this giant boat secured to shore is a part of the journey that really needs experienced sailors. Paul points this out, and he calls the sailors out for trying to escape, trying to get in the lifeboat. They have to do what they're responsible for. They have to get this boat home safely, or at least somewhere safely. So the soldiers cut the lines to the lifeboat. They cut the lifeboat free. I mean, goodbye salvation possibility for a few of us. Goodbye lifeboat. Now we're all in this together until the bitter end. Who are you all in it together with until the bitter end? What team have you signed up for? How deep is our love? If we measured it with a weight and rope, would we have to pull and pull and pull to get it back on deck? Would we be left with most of the rope on deck when we dropped it in? Our love, does it look deep? But, we've planted a lot of wing dikes to control the energy underneath that people can hit easily and run aground. How deep is our love? Do we love a lot of people in shallow ways, or a few people in deep ways? Or do we try to love everyone in deep ways or everyone in shallow ways so we don't get hurt? How deep is our love? I had a friend tell me once that it was very interesting to be my friend because I teach people how to love. At the end of the day, they said, that's really what you do. You teach people to love God more, love self more, love neighbor more. You teach people how to live out the greatest commandments. And I mean, just look at how much you love the people of your congregation. Okay, but I'm not perfect at love. I'm sometimes not even sure I'm very good at it. I love the people of my congregation, the people that I preach and teach with. I love my family. I love my dogs. I love a few other people quite deeply. As a Methodist, I believe that God will perfect me in love in this lifetime if I am open to God's sanctifying grace and do the work God requires of me and has called me to do. But honestly, a lot of what I know about love, I learned doing that work from people of my congregations. I have learned about love from you and from people like you in my past churches. How many jobs do you get to see how love is shared between multiple generations and branches of the same family? And how many roles do you get to be the confidant of the grandfather and his son or daughter, and hear all the great things they see in each other, or follow how they struggle with generational curses and each other having them, and see how they all still love each other. I get a front row seat to a lot of love drama. I've seen fractures in families and relationships. I've seen reconciliations that I could never imagine. All because of love so deep, the ropes to the lifeboat got cut by the family members. I've seen people go through hell together and choose to stay in it together because they knew the others couldn't get to shore without them. I once saw a parishioner perform an act of love so deep, I couldn't measure it. I couldn't imagine myself ever doing something like that. The person the act of love benefited, they didn't deserve it. They'd done everything in the world to push the other person away, but when they needed help, that person showed up and opened up and loved them. And it was so clearly inspired by the God of grace. It took my breath away. And I realized that's what God's love for us looks like. It has no measure. We don't deserve it. It's unfathomable. The rope would just go out and out and out and out and out because there's no bottom for a weight to rest on. So what I've learned from you and from people like you is that a lot of love is simply accepting people as they are. Accepting people as they are and expecting them to act like it. Expecting them to act like they act, even if we don't love how they act. Expecting that even those actions we don't love are a part of them, and expecting them to show up again. When people disappoint us or surprise us, people we love, we're often surprised not because they've done something new, but because they've done something old that we can't stand. And we have quit expecting them to act like they act and accepting that all of that is part of them. These moments when we fail to accept or to expect can be like a depth finding on our love. We want to say to that other person, I love you, but how deep is that love really? Does God love us? But no, God knows who we are. God accepts who God made us to be. God knows what has happened to us along the way, what decisions we've made, what unhealthy coping mechanisms we've developed. God expects us to be who we are. It doesn't mean God never wants us to get better, but God accepts us when we get it right and when we get it wrong. God gave us the free will to choose and the offer of forgiveness when we need it because we need it. God accepts us. God expects us to be how we are. So God's love is unfathomable to us without end because it's not love like we usually have. God doesn't have a lifeboat to use with us. God's on our ship with us until the end, bitter or sweet. A new person showed up at a church I served, and they asked me to help them find a Sunday school class. She was securely middle-aged for that church, which meant she was between, in the middle of the Sunday school classes we had. She was about 10 years older than the parents of young children, and about 10 years younger than the next class up who were having grandchildren. So I told her about the different classes and that I was about to guest teach a series on the Good Samaritan in the younger class, and she loved that story. It was her favorite Bible story, so she decided to attend with me the next week. If you've ever been a member of a long-term Sunday school class, you probably realize there are ways you act when you have a new guest in your Sunday school class, and there are ways you do not act. That day, that class could have been a training video on how not to act when you have a guest in class for the first time or when your pastor is guest teaching. It was bad. We were just diving into the story of the Good Samaritan, and we were, the man was in the ditch, and we were talking about the people who just left him in the ditch and passed him by. And the class sided with the people who left the man in the ditch. We never got to the Good Samaritan. They sided with the people who just passed the man by and let him be in the ditch. They listed the people, both individuals and then groups of people, that they would opt to ignore and leave in ditches, which, later prompted me to write a sermon that basically said, the lowest ladder of required love is not leaving people in ditches. Come on. I just stood there like, what? And they thought my reaction was funny, so they just kept it rolling. And it was hard. When we left the class, I apologized to this woman who was new to the church that I brought along. And I told her, I thought maybe they'd been in rare form that day. I wasn't sure. I accepted that sometimes their group dynamics led them to do things like that, but I didn't expect them to show that side of the group to a new person. I had no idea what was wrong with them, and I told her I would be glad to help her get acclimated to another Sunday school class. And she said, the only thing wrong with them is that their kids are still in elementary and middle school. Their kids haven't broken their hearts yet. And seeing that I didn't understand, she continued, their kids are still really easy to love. They still do what they tell them to do. So they think love is easy. And for people who act like they tell them to, when their kids get older and more independent, their kids will do things that their parents won't understand or like. They will break their parents' hearts. And their parents will need to find a way to still love those people they disagree with. They will realize love is harder than they thought. People that you love don't always do what you tell them they have to do for you to love them. People do all kinds of things. They will have to learn to love people who challenge them and their worldview, and they will learn compassion. Or they won't, and it will harm their children. So this is my class. I want to be with them when they have to learn those things I learned. I will help them. This is my ministry here. I gave her an out. I invited her onto the lifeboat. Let's go drop the anchors off the bow. She stayed because God put that ship on her heart. I was ready to go. She wanted to stay. Sometimes we want to get on the lifeboat. Sometimes we realize we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down, when they all should let us be. There have been times when I have taken the lifeboat to go drop the anchor off the bow, when I've been part of a group or a relationship in which I thought we were in it together, but I realized the only one trying to get us to shore was me. Like they just wanted to be on the boat and party while I did the work. No, I gotta go. I wasn't necessary for that particular journey because we weren't going anywhere I needed to go. You know, sometimes with another person or a group, you are so tired of getting banged up on the wing dikes, on the hidden obstacles under the surface that are unmarked on your GPS that you just say, oh, I gotta go, drop the anchor, save myself. Sometimes we have to get in the lifeboat and save ourselves because that's not the ship we're supposed to be on anyway. It won't take us anywhere but down. And sometimes, like in the case of our family or our kids, please with your kids, we can't take the lifeboat because that's our ship. And the others may not make it to shore if we bail. So we have to accept and expect and love as deeply as we can. All of that we have to work out with God in prayer, like which ships are ours when we take the lifeboat, that sort of thing. We work that out with God in prayer, with the one who loves us unfathomably. God will make it clear if we talk to God and if we listen to what God has to say. How deep is God's love for you? How deep is God's love for you? And how deep is your love? But how deep is your love? I think all of that is worth thinking about in this time when we learn lessons from the shipwreck of Paul. May God bless you this week. May it be a fantastic week in which you don't find yourself running aground. You find yourself getting to your destination. You find yourself unworried about the shape of your ship and you have enough grain to eat. Have a great week.
Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words were vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not be given by love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship